Among history's most remarkable figures, two women stand whose strength and legacy still echo across centuries: Duchess Elisabeth of Wurttemberg and Princess Adelheid of Hohenlohe-Langenburg. Let us begin with the first, Duchess Elisabeth of Wurttemberg. Duchess Elisabeth of Wurttemberg was born on the 21st of April in the year 1767 in Treptow and der Riga, a small town in the province of Pomerania, part of the Kingdom of Prussia. How did a young girl from a minor German duchy become the beloved companion of a dying emperor? What did her grace and charm bring to the heart of the Austrian court? And how did her story end so soon, yet so deeply remembered? The answers rest in her quiet rise, tragic youth, and unwavering devotion. Please watch my full video until the end, and don't forget to like, share, and subscribe. Please make sure to share it with your friends. Thank you. Now, let us dive into the full story. Elisabeth Wilhelmine Lewis was the 8th child of Frederick II Eugene, Duke of Wurttemberg, and his wife Princess Sophia Dorothea of Brandenburg-Schwedt. Raised in the deeply traditional and militarized Prussian lands, Elizabeth grew up in a household that balanced duty, culture, and strict etiquette. Her early years were marked not by opulence, but by preparation. She was trained to serve dynastic ambition with humility and intelligence. Although little is recorded about her private moments in childhood, those who knew her described a naturally kind spirit, inquisitive eyes, and an inner calm that set her apart. From a young age, she understood the path laid before her would be defined not by personal choice, but by the needs of state and family. Elizabeth's early life unfolded within the structured yet cultured walls of the Wurttemberg court. As the daughter of Duke Frederick II Eugene and Princess Sophia Dorothea, she was one of 12 children born into a family steeped in military tradition and Protestant values. The court of Montbéliard, where she spent much of her early childhood, was not among Europe's grandest courts, but it was a place of intellectual openness and Protestant rigor, shaped by the Duke's interest in Enlightenment thought. Within this refined but modest environment, Elizabeth received a solid education, likely focused on languages, history, religion, and music, all essential for noble girls preparing for dynastic marriage. Although formal schooling for girls was limited, letters preserved from Elizabeth's youth suggest she was literate, articulate, and emotionally perceptive from a young age. Her writing reveals both discipline and sensitivity, characteristics that would later define her brief role on the grand stage of European politics. Despite being a younger daughter, Elizabeth was never overlooked. Her lineage, combined with her quiet composure and strong sense of duty, made her a valuable prospect for alliance building within the German and Austrian royal networks. As the political tides of Central Europe shifted during the late 18th century, Elizabeth's future, once a private affair, became part of a far greater design. Behind the quiet elegance of her upbringing, history was already moving to place her in the heart of empire. At the age of 15, Elizabeth's life took a dramatic turn when she was summoned to Vienna by Emperor Joseph II, ruler of the Holy Roman Empire. This invitation was not a casual gesture. It was a calculated move within the dynastic strategies of the Habsburg court. The emperor had taken a special interest in grooming a future consort for his nephew, Francis, the son of Grand Duke Leopold of Tuscany, who stood next in line to inherit the imperial throne. For Elizabeth, the summons meant an abrupt departure from her familiar Prussian world. She left behind her Protestant upbringing, her large family, and the security of her modest court. In Vienna, she entered a realm of Catholic grandeur, imperial formality, and political intrigue. The city stood as the glittering center of the Habsburg realm, a place where destiny was shaped not by personal wishes, but by empire-wide necessity. Elizabeth was placed under the care of the Salesian Sisters, a convent school well known for training noblewomen in refinement and devotion. Here, she began her formal transition into Austrian society. It was also during this time that she converted from Lutheranism to Roman Catholicism, a deeply personal shift, made not for belief alone, but to fulfill her expected role at the Habsburg court. Though still a teenager, Elizabeth adjusted with grace. Her gentleness, education, and poise quickly gained notice. What had begun as a diplomatic arrangement was quietly evolving into something far more heartfelt, both for Elizabeth and those observing her rise within Vienna's golden halls. Once settled in Vienna, Elizabeth entered the convent of the Salesian Sisters, a religious institution known not only for its piety, but also for educating noblewomen in the customs of the imperial court. The convent served as a refined halfway point between her Prussian upbringing and her future role as an Austrian archduchess. For Elizabeth, this was more than a school, it was a cultural transformation. The Salesian Sisters guided her through Catholic religious instruction, court etiquette, and languages spoken within the empire. While her conversion to Roman Catholicism had been agreed upon in principle before her arrival, it was within the peaceful walls of the convent that Elizabeth absorbed its practices sincerely. She was taught the rituals, prayers, and traditions that would later define her public identity as a Catholic consort. Her graceful acceptance of this faith impressed many in the imperial circle. Beyond religious training, Elizabeth's days were likely filled with music lessons, reading, and quiet correspondence with her family back in Prussia. These letters, later archived in Stuttgart, offer glimpses into her thoughts, revealing a thoughtful girl growing steadily into a poised young woman. Within this cloistered world, Elizabeth found discipline, serenity, and perhaps unexpected joy. The sisters noted her kindness and soft-spoken charm, traits that would soon endear her to the highest ranks of Austria. The convent may have been a place of transition, but it also became a sanctuary where Elizabeth quietly prepared herself for a future that none yet fully imagined. Elizabeth's official conversion to Roman Catholicism marked a pivotal chapter in her transformation from a Prussian duchess to a future Austrian archduchess. Though raised in Lutheran tradition, she approached her new faith with sincerity and devotion, not merely to fulfill court expectations, but as a step toward uniting two powerful dynasties. Her confirmation was conducted with solemn dignity, and it symbolized more than a personal change. It was a public gesture of loyalty to the Habsburg Empire. Following her religious instruction, Elizabeth began formal preparations for court life. This stage involved mastering the intricate rules of Austrian protocol, including the use of specific titles, gestures, and behaviors that governed every aspect of courtly existence. She practiced the graceful curtsies expected of high-ranking women, learned to move through salons with controlled elegance, and studied the spoken rhythms of Viennese German and Italian, languages commonly used at the imperial court. Emperor Joseph II, who had taken a particular interest in her progress, was reportedly pleased with her transformation. He viewed Elizabeth as both a fitting consort for his nephew and a calming presence in a court often strained by politics and formality. As her wedding approached, those within Vienna's elite circles began to speak not only of a diplomatic alliance, but of the charm and intelligence of the young duchess who had, in a matter of months, become a promising star of the imperial court. On the 6th of January in the year 1788, Elizabeth of Wurttemberg was formally married to Archduke Francis of Austria in a splendid ceremony held in Vienna. Though the marriage was arranged, it unfolded with warmth, admiration, and a growing affection between the young couple. Francis, the son of Grand Duke Leopold of Tuscany and the heir presumptive to the Habsburg throne, was just 19. Elizabeth was 20. Together, they embodied a union of dynastic strength and youthful promise. The wedding was more than a private affair. It was a grand political statement. Austrian courtiers, foreign dignitaries, and members of the Habsburg family gathered to witness the alliance between the House of Wurttemberg and the future imperial ruler. Dressed in ornate court attire, Elizabeth made a graceful entrance that won the admiration of all present. Her delicate beauty, calm demeanor, and gentle presence earned her quiet praise. Following the marriage, Elizabeth was granted the title of Archduchess of Austria and formally welcomed into the heart of Habsburg power. Though her rank had risen, she remained modest, balancing her new responsibilities with a sincerity that made her widely liked. Even Emperor Joseph II, often weary of courtly flattery, found comfort in her presence. In the months that followed, Elizabeth and Francis began their short life together as a young imperial couple, navigating the splendor and expectations of the Austrian court. Their bond, though young and still growing, offered a rare moment of harmony within a dynasty often fraught with tension. As Elizabeth settled into her new life at the Austrian court, she quickly became a quiet source of comfort to one of its most powerful yet troubled figures, Emperor Joseph II. By the late 1780s, Joseph's health was in steady decline. Worn down by political failures, personal grief, and worsening illness, the emperor had become increasingly withdrawn. Yet in Elizabeth, he found a gentle presence that brought a rare softness to his final years. The young archduchess, still adjusting to her role, showed a natural kindness and patience in her interactions with the emperor. She visited him often, listened with quiet attentiveness, and brought light conversation and warmth to his otherwise somber chambers. Despite the heavy weight of court formalities, Elizabeth's unassuming nature helped bridge the emotional distance that so often surrounded the imperial figure. Observers noted the subtle bond that developed between the aging monarch and his young niece-in-law. Though he had little strength left to govern with his former vigor, Joseph seemed lifted by Elizabeth's presence. Her youth reminded him of possibilities, of continuity, of future generations, and of the dynasty's lasting strength. As the emperor's condition worsened in early 1790, Elizabeth remained close. In an empire often governed by strategy and statecraft, it was this quiet, human connection that defined her early months at court. Long before her own tragedy unfolded, Elizabeth had already played a quiet role in easing the emperor's final journey, not as a ruler or a consort, but simply as a gentle soul beside him. Elizabeth's arrival at the Austrian court was more than a personal transition. It carried deep political significance. In the intricate world of European dynasties, every marriage, every title, and every public appearance was a calculated move in the grand chessboard of power. As the young wife of Archduke Francis, Elizabeth symbolized unity between the Habsburgs and the Wurttembergs, a Protestant-born duchess who had embraced Catholicism, poised to be part of the future imperial family. But it was not just her lineage that drew admiration. Elizabeth quickly became known for her soft-spoken grace, modesty, and luminous charm. Her presence at court was refreshing, particularly in contrast to the tensions that often surrounded imperial politics. She was not flamboyant or politically assertive, but her gentle demeanor carried its own influence. Nobles and foreign diplomats alike remarked on her quiet elegance, noting how she elevated the tone of imperial events simply by attending. Emperor Joseph II, increasingly frail and melancholic, found solace in her youthful spirit. Her conversations, music, and kind attentions seemed to soothe his wearied heart, while her marriage to Francis reassured him that the dynasty's future was in steady hands. Even those who distrusted foreign princesses could not deny the harmony she brought to the court. In many ways, Elizabeth became a living symbol of reconciliation between faiths, of dynastic cooperation, and of personal grace in a world dominated by politics. Though she held no formal power, her impact in these months was felt deeply and remembered long after. Though Elizabeth embraced her role at the Austrian court with grace, she never severed the emotional bond with her family in Wurttemberg. Throughout her time in Vienna, she wrote frequent letters to her parents, Duke Frederick II Eugene and Princess Sophia Dorothea, as well as to her beloved brother Charles. These letters, now preserved in the State Archive of Stuttgart, offer a rare and touching glimpse into the mind of a young woman navigating immense cultural and personal change. Elizabeth's letters reflect a rich blend of formality and vulnerability. She spoke with affection of the emperor's kindness, her admiration for Francis, and the solemn rituals of court life. Yet between the lines, there is also a sense of homesickness and quiet longing. She asked after her siblings, described daily routines, and occasionally expressed how different court life felt from her upbringing. What makes these letters so valuable is their tone, never bitter, never defiant, but always thoughtful. They reveal a strong sense of duty, a deep respect for her new role, and a warm, steady love for the family she left behind. Even in her short time at court, Elizabeth remained a daughter and sister first, and her correspondence proved that beneath the titles and ceremonies, she never lost her grounding. In these private writings, Elizabeth's voice lives on, clear, gentle, and filled with the quiet strength that made her a cherished figure in both the Wurttemberg and Habsburg worlds. By the close of 1789, Elizabeth had begun to show signs of pregnancy, a development that brought both celebration and concern to the Austrian court. As the young Archduchess prepared for motherhood, whispers of her delicate health began to circulate. Courtiers and attendants noticed her growing fatigue and occasional faint spells. Though such symptoms were often dismissed as common in pregnancy, those closest to her worried that her constitution might not endure the challenges ahead. Elizabeth, ever composed, met this period with quiet determination. She continued to attend court functions, write letters home, and fulfill her duties as consort. But behind her graceful exterior, the strain was beginning to show. Her medical care was entrusted to the best physicians available, yet understanding of women's health remained limited in the 18th century. Rest, prayer, and close observation were the most that could be offered. Despite her fragility, Elizabeth's pregnancy was celebrated as a promise for the future. A child born to her and Francis would not only secure the Habsburg line, but also symbolize the successful union of two major dynasties. Hopes for a healthy heir grew with each passing week, and preparations for the birth quietly began behind palace doors. Still, concern never fully faded. While Elizabeth tried to shield others from her discomfort, those nearest to her sensed the quiet tension surrounding her condition, a mix of anticipation and fear, as history moved ever closer to a turning point that no one could yet name. As Emperor Joseph II's health sharply declined in the early months of 1790, the atmosphere at the Austrian court turned solemn. Amid this climate of sorrow, Elizabeth remained a constant and calming presence. Despite her own frail condition, she continued to visit the ailing emperor, offering quiet companionship during his final weeks. Those who witnessed their final interactions remarked on her gentleness and unwavering devotion. Elizabeth's bond with the emperor had deepened steadily since her arrival. she understood the loneliness he carried, the grief of losing his beloved wife and daughter, the weight of political failure, and the isolation of his rank. In Elizabeth, he found not a political ally, but a warm and sincere spirit who listened without judgment and brought a sense of peace to his troubled mind. Her visits became more frequent as Joseph's strength faded. She sat by his bedside, sometimes reading aloud or simply sitting in silence while he rested. These final moments shared between a dying ruler and his young niece-in-law left a quiet impression on all who served the court. Elizabeth's selfless care during this time was seen as a reflection of her character, compassionate, steady, and emotionally attuned beyond her years. Though only 22 and carrying her first child, Elizabeth never wavered in her duty. In the face of her own physical challenges, she gave herself fully to comforting an emperor whose legacy would soon pass into memory, unaware that her own time was fading just as swiftly. On the 15th of February in the year 1790, Elizabeth attended a solemn court ceremony, the anointing of the sick for Emperor Joseph II. He was nearing the end of his life, and the court gathered in hushed reverence to mark his final sacrament. Despite being heavily pregnant and visibly weak, Elizabeth insisted on being present. Her devotion, once again, placed the needs of others above her own. Shortly after the ceremony, she collapsed. The court fell into alarm. Elizabeth was rushed back to her private chambers as physicians were summoned in haste. Her condition deteriorated rapidly. Over the next 2 days, she suffered intense labor under fragile circumstances, her body too delicate to bear the strain. On the night of the 18th of February, after more than 24 hours of exhausting effort, she gave birth to a daughter, Archduchess Ludovica Elisabeth. The birth, though premature, brought a momentary sense of hope, but Elizabeth was already slipping away. Weak from labor and suffering internal complications, she underwent an emergency operation in a desperate attempt to save her life. The procedures of the time were primitive and painful, offering little relief and even less success. Despite every effort, Elizabeth could not recover. Her chambers, once filled with quiet joy and expectation, were overtaken by whispers, prayers, and tears. The Austrian court, still mourning an emperor, now prepared to mourn a young duchess, whose light had faded too soon, just as new life had entered the world. In the early hours of the 18th of February, 1790, amid great concern and sorrow, Elizabeth gave birth to her first and only child, a daughter named Ludovica Elisabeth. Though the delivery was premature and marked by grave complications, the infant was alive. The birth was met with a muted joy, overshadowed by Elizabeth's critical condition. For a court already mourning the imminent death of Emperor Joseph II, this fragile new life offered both comfort and anxiety. Little Ludovica Elisabeth was immediately placed under the care of the imperial household's nurses and midwives. Her arrival was hailed as the continuation of the Habsburg line, but the joy was subdued. Without her mother by her side, the infant's early days were quiet, watched over with care but wrapped in uncertainty. She was described as delicate, with soft features reminiscent of her mother, and her presence brought a small measure of hope to her grieving father, Archduke Francis. The court issued official announcements of the birth, though they were restrained in tone. There were no grand celebrations, only careful prayers for the newborn's survival and Elizabeth's recovery, hopes that would be quickly extinguished in the hours to follow. Ludovica's entry into the world marked both a beginning and an ending. Born in the shadow of death, she would live only 16 months, her brief life a solemn reminder of the delicate balance between joy and loss within royal destiny. Her name, like her mother's, would soon be etched in quiet sorrow across the halls of the Hofburg. As the newborn Archduchess Ludovica Elisabeth took her first breaths, her mother lay fading just beyond reach. Elizabeth's final hours were marked by silence, prayer, and desperate medical efforts. Doctors and attendants worked through the night in her chambers, attempting everything known to medicine at the time: poultices, bloodletting, and a last resort operation. But Elizabeth's body, already weakened by pregnancy and emotional strain, could no longer respond. Those close to her described her final moments as peaceful, though marked by visible pain. She remained conscious for much of her final day, drifting in and out of awareness. Courtiers and family members passed quietly through the room, offering whispered farewells. Archduke Francis stayed by her side, deeply shaken by the swiftness with which joy had turned to fear. His grief was private, held in tight reserve, the future emperor already beginning to wear the mask of imperial restraint. Elizabeth died on the 18th of February in the year 1790, just hours after giving birth. She was only 22 years old. The imperial court, still mourning the expected loss of Joseph II, now plunged into deeper sorrow. Word of her death spread through Vienna with a sense of disbelief. How could such a gentle, bright spirit be taken so soon? Her passing marked the end of a luminous but short life, a life remembered not for grand achievements or political influence, but for the quiet grace with which she carried the weight of empire, love, and sacrifice. The death of Duchess Elisabeth of Wurttemberg cast a heavy shadow over the imperial court. Just as Austria prepared to mourn Emperor Joseph II, another funeral had to be planned, this one for a young woman whose promise had only begun to unfold. On the morning after her death, Elizabeth's body was prepared according to imperial tradition. Her delicate frame was dressed in solemn garments of mourning, and her features, though pale, still held the soft serenity for which she had been so admired. The funeral procession was elegant yet somber, attended by members of the Habsburg family, court officials, foreign ambassadors, and the many attendants who had served her during her brief time in Vienna. The silence of the crowd reflected a shared sense of loss, not merely for a duchess, but for the future she represented. She was interred in the imperial crypt, the resting place of Austrian royalty, beneath the streets of Vienna, among centuries of rulers and consorts. In the days that followed, Elizabeth's name was spoken in quiet reverence. Her letters, preserved by her family, offered a lasting echo of her gentle voice. Francis, still reeling from the loss, would go on to become Emperor Francis II, but he would always remember the first woman who stood beside him at the threshold of empire. Though her life was brief, Elizabeth left behind a legacy of dignity, selflessness, and silent strength. She did not live to see her child grow, nor to witness the shifting tides of the empire she joined. Yet in her final days, she brought light to a fading emperor, peace to a grieving court, and love to a young archduke. Her story is not one of political triumph, but of quiet grace, a grace that continues to echo through the shadows of Vienna's imperial past. Let us now turn to another remarkable figure of royal descent. Princess Adelheid of Hohenlohe-Langenburg was born on the 20th of July in the year 1835 in the town of Langenburg, within the kingdom of Wurttemberg. What path awaited a girl born into noble blood, yet positioned outside the glare of direct succession? How did the daughter of a minor German principality come to influence the destinies of Europe's most powerful thrones? And how did her quiet resilience echo through generations of monarchs, from the German Empire to today's royal families? Adelheid Victoria Amalie Louise Maria Constance, known as Ada to her family, entered the world surrounded by titles and expectations. She was the second daughter of Ernst I, Prince of Hohenlohe-Langenburg, and Princess Fedora of Leiningen. Her mother, notably, was the older half-sister of Queen Victoria of the British Empire. This connection placed young Adelheid within the fringes of one of Europe's most prominent dynasties, close to the heart of royalty, yet never quite in its center. Her childhood in Langenburg was spent within the traditions of a principled yet modest court. Though the Hohenlohes did not command vast armies or territories, their name carried respect, and their alliances were carefully nurtured. From an early age, Adelheid was trained in languages, religion, court manners, and music, qualities that would prepare her for a future no one could yet predict. She was not raised to rule, but rather to complement power, a role that would, in time, shape the very face of imperial history. Adelheid's life was shaped not only by the court into which she was born, but by the powerful women who stood just beyond her immediate household. Most notably, her mother Fedora and her half-aunt, Queen Victoria of the British Empire. Fedora of Leiningen, Adelheid's mother, was the elder half-sister of Victoria, born from Princess Victoria of Saxe-Coburg-Saalfeld's first marriage. Though Fedora and Victoria had different fathers, their bond was genuine, and their connection added both weight and complexity to Adelheid's upbringing. Being Queen Victoria's half-niece placed Adelheid in a delicate position, close to the British crown, yet not entirely a part of it. This unique relationship offered her both prestige and careful scrutiny. Family letters suggest that the Queen held a degree of affection for her niece, though she was also highly protective of the royal family's image. Adelheid's proximity to the throne made her both a desirable match and a political risk, depending on the moment and the mood of European diplomacy. Within her own household, Fedora instilled in Adelheid the values of dignity, loyalty, and quiet strength. Fedora, who had once struggled with her own displacement after marriage, was determined to give her daughter a strong foundation in both personal faith and public duty. These teachings left a lasting imprint on Adelheid, who grew up aware of her heritage but never entitled by it. The influence of these two royal women, one a queen, the other a wise and seasoned mother, would shape Adelheid's view of service, womanhood, and what it meant to exist within the orbit of power without seeking its center. Growing up in the Principality of Langenburg, Adelheid was surrounded by the quiet elegance of a regional court. Unlike the glittering palaces of Vienna or London, Langenburg's environment was more restrained, guided by duty, education, and the expectations of noble responsibility. Still, within these modest walls, Adelheid received the training befitting a princess whose future might one day cross the paths of great empires. Her education was both traditional and thoughtful. Tutors instructed her in multiple languages, including German, French, and English, essential tools for diplomacy and courtly exchange. Music, literature, theology, and European history were woven into her lessons. Alongside formal studies, she was also taught the finer points of royal conduct, how to curtsy, how to write formal correspondence, how to listen with grace and speak with restraint. Religious instruction held a central place in her upbringing. The Hohenlohe family, steeped in Lutheran tradition, emphasized humility and moral strength. Adelheid's letters and later reflections show an early tendency toward calm introspection, as well as a deep sense of loyalty, not only to family but to a broader sense of national and dynastic service. Though her days were structured, they were not joyless. Adelheid enjoyed sketching, music, and time spent in the gardens of the family estate. These early years, far from the noise of imperial politics, gave her a steady emotional base and quiet self-assurance. Little did she know that the lessons learned in these early halls, patience, formality, and balance, would soon be tested by courtships, wars, and the turbulent ambitions of European monarchs. In the early 1850s, when Adelheid was still in her teenage years, a dramatic political episode briefly placed her name at the center of European attention: the courtship proposal of Napoleon III. Recently crowned as Emperor of the French, Napoleon sought not only to solidify his own legitimacy, but to connect his rising empire to the old royal houses of Europe. Adelheid, with her noble German lineage and familial connection to Queen Victoria, presented a compelling choice. Napoleon had never met her, yet the proposal he extended to her parents was strategic. A union with Adelheid would strengthen ties with the German states, offer dynastic respectability to the Bonaparte line, and most enticingly, draw France closer to Britain without the risk of offending the British crown directly. Because Adelheid was Queen Victoria's half-niece and not a royal princess in her own right, the marriage seemed diplomatically plausible. However, the reaction from the British court was swift and silent. Queen Victoria and Prince Albert, cautious and conservative, were horrified by the idea. To them, Napoleon's regime was still tainted by revolutionary origins and instability. Supporting such a match would confer undue legitimacy upon a man whose empire they did not yet trust. Their silence was calculated, neither approving nor outright denying, but it sent a clear signal. Adelheid herself was reportedly dismayed by the rejection. Whether she was flattered by the attention or saw it as a real opportunity is unclear. But her family interpreted the British silence as disapproval and turned Napoleon down. Soon after, Napoleon shifted his focus and proposed to Eugénie de Montijo, who became Empress of France. For Adelheid, this brush with imperial power passed, a near miss with history that could have changed the course of her life entirely. On the 11th of September in the year 1856, Adelheid of Hohenlohe-Langenburg married Frederick, Duke of Schleswig-Holstein. This union, though quieter than her earlier royal proposal, would ultimately place her at the center of northern Germany's shifting political landscape. Frederick, a member of the Schleswig-Holstein-Sonderburg-Augustenburg line, held claims to the duchies long contested between Denmark and the German Confederation. Their marriage blended dynastic ambition with personal stability. The ceremony marked the beginning of Adelheid's transition from a quiet court in Wurttemberg to the more politically charged world of Schleswig-Holstein. Though the duchies were still under Danish administration at the time, Frederick's lineage carried weight among German nationalists who viewed him as the rightful heir. As such, Adelheid's role as duchess carried with it the quiet burden of symbolic power. Their early married life was spent in Dalzig, a rural estate in Lower Lusatia. There, they began a family and tried to lead a calm domestic life amid a growing storm of nationalist tension. Adelheid gave birth to her first child, Prince Friedrich, in 1857, though the boy died in infancy just over a year later. Despite the sorrow, she continued to build her family with resilience and care. Over time, Adelheid bore 7 children, including Augusta Victoria, a daughter who would one day become the last German empress. As a mother and consort, Adelheid carried herself with dignity, navigating the demands of noble motherhood while supporting her husband's political aspirations. Though removed from the imperial capitals, her influence grew steadily through her lineage, one quiet decision at a time. Adelheid's role as duchess was deeply intertwined with her duties as a mother, not only to raise children, but to shape future dynasts. In an age where royal marriages were political tools and each child a symbol of alliance or legacy, motherhood was more than a private affair. It was a public obligation with far-reaching consequences. She and Duke Frederick had 7 children in total. Their first son, Prince Friedrich, was born in 1857 but tragically died just over a year later. The loss left a deep mark on the couple, especially on Adelheid, who grieved privately while maintaining her expected public composure. Despite this sorrow, she pressed on, giving birth to 6 more children, each carrying the hopes of the family's dynastic future. Among them was Augusta Victoria, born in 1858, who would grow to become the last German empress. Others included Princess Caroline Mathilda, Prince Ernst Gunther, and Princess Fedora, each of whom would marry into significant European houses. Adelheid oversaw their upbringing with care, emphasizing tradition, education, and religious devotion. Her household blended formality with affection, a delicate balance for a woman tasked with preparing children not only for adulthood, but for the demands of royal alliances. Behind closed doors, she offered warmth and stability. In public, she displayed dignity and discretion. Unlike more politically outspoken consorts of her time, Adelheid's influence was subtle, passed on through values, poise, and quiet strength, virtues that would echo through the lives of her children and beyond. Among Adelheid's children, none would rise to greater prominence than her daughter Augusta Victoria, born on the 22nd of October in the year 1858. From her earliest years, Augusta Victoria displayed the composure, gentleness, and deep sense of duty instilled by her mother. Adelheid guided her daughter not toward personal ambition, but toward grace and readiness, knowing that in the royal world, destiny often came without warning. That moment came when Augusta Victoria became engaged to Prince Wilhelm of Prussia, the future German emperor. The engagement, formalized in 1880, followed a period of increasing favor from the Prussian court. Her Hohenlohe-Langenburg background, once considered too minor for such a union, was re-evaluated amid growing nationalist sentiment and dynastic consolidation. Adelheid, though widowed by this time, was a steady presence behind the scenes. She advised her daughter with quiet strength and ensured she entered her new life with the bearing expected of a future empress. The marriage, which took place in early 1881, was a turning point not only for Augusta Victoria, but for Adelheid as well. Her daughter was now destined to become the First Lady of the German Empire. Though not politically vocal, Adelheid's influence on her daughter was unmistakable. The humility, propriety, and deep religious faith Augusta Victoria would display as empress were reflections of her mother's upbringing. In guiding her daughter's path with patience rather than pressure, Adelheid helped shape the woman who would stand beside the last Kaiser of Germany and witness the twilight of an empire from within its golden halls. Throughout the 1860s, Adelheid's life was marked by movement, not just physical relocation, but the shifting tides of politics and identity. After their marriage, Adelheid and Frederick resided quietly at Danzig, an estate in Lower Lusatia. It was a rural setting, ideal for raising young children and maintaining a private household. But in 1863, everything changed when Frederick became the legitimate heir to the contested duchies of Schleswig and Holstein. The family relocated to Kiel, a city positioned at the heart of the Schleswig-Holstein question, a decades-long dispute over sovereignty that pitted Denmark against rising German nationalist sentiment. With Frederick's claim now recognized, he and Adelheid found themselves at the center of a region in flux. The duchies, long a symbol of fractured European power, became both their home and their political burden. In Kiel, Adelheid stepped into her role as Duchess consort with discretion and grace. While her husband engaged in political efforts to assert his dynastic rights, she focused on household affairs, charitable works, and supporting her children's education. Yet the atmosphere was far from settled. Tensions with Denmark remained unresolved, and the duchy's fate was still being negotiated behind diplomatic doors. Adelheid adjusted, as she always had, with quiet dignity. Though far from the grand courts of Berlin or Vienna, her household in Kiel maintained noble standards, even as the family stood on uncertain ground. These were years of careful poise, where each decision, even where to live, carried both personal weight and political meaning. The Austro-Prussian War of 1866 marked a turning point for Adelheid and her family. Although the conflict was short, its consequences were profound, especially for the duchies of Schleswig and Holstein, which had long been caught in a tug of war between regional powers. Frederick, Adelheid's husband, had positioned himself as a rightful heir to these territories, but the outcome of the war reshaped their future permanently. Prussia emerged victorious, and in the process, annexed the duchies. Frederick's claims were quietly set aside, and the family's political aspirations were effectively curtailed. For Adelheid, the transition was deeply personal. The titles they had lived by and the roles they had embraced in Kiel were now reduced to ceremonial memory. The family was no longer seen as a ruling house, but as distant nobility beneath the new Prussian order. Following the annexation, Adelheid and Frederick left Kiel and returned to Danzig. The years that followed were quieter, but not bitter. Adelheid maintained her dignity and shifted her focus to family, tradition, and stability. Her ability to adjust, to preserve grace under disappointment, became one of her quiet strengths. While some noble families were torn apart by the upheaval, Adelheid kept her household intact. She offered her children a sense of continuity, even as the map of Germany changed around them. This resilience, calm, steady, and dignified, became the core of her legacy. She may not have ruled a duchy, but in her conduct during loss, she revealed the true strength of a duchess. In the year 1880, tragedy once again visited Adelheid's life. Her husband, Frederick VIII, Duke of Schleswig-Holstein, passed away, closing a chapter marked by political striving and shared dignity. At just 45 years old, Adelheid became a widow. Yet even in mourning, she faced a moment of profound transition. Just months after Frederick's death, her daughter Augusta Victoria became engaged to Prince Wilhelm of Prussia, the future German emperor. The juxtaposition of grief and celebration was deeply felt. While Adelheid mourned her husband's passing, she also prepared to see her daughter ascend to the very heights of European power. It was a bittersweet moment, one that demanded composure, foresight, and emotional balance. As the matriarch of her family, she knew that Augusta Victoria's future would reshape the name of Hohenlohe-Langenburg, even if the duchy itself had faded into history. Adelheid oversaw the final arrangements of her husband's burial with quiet ceremony, then turned her full attention to preparing Augusta Victoria for life as a Prussian crown princess. The engagement marked a symbolic recovery for the family, placing Adelheid once again in the orbit of imperial politics, but now through her children, not her own position. With 4 daughters still unmarried and a growing network of European connections, Adelheid became a sought-after figure among dynastic circles. Her sense of discretion, lineage, and poise made her an ideal guide for the younger generation of royals. Widowed yet respected, removed from power yet closely connected to it, Adelheid entered a new phase of influence, one defined not by ruling, but by shaping those who would. After Augusta Victoria's engagement to Prince Wilhelm of Prussia, Adelheid's ties to the Prussian royal house deepened significantly. What had once been a distant connection through her British relatives now became a direct link to the German imperial throne. Through marriage, her family had stepped into the very center of European power. In the years that followed, more of Adelheid's children secured important royal alliances. Her daughter, Princess Caroline Mathilde, married Duke Friedrich Ferdinand of Schleswig-Holstein in 1885, further strengthening the family's noble standing. Her daughter Louise Sophie entered into union with Prince Friedrich Leopold of Prussia in 1889, a match that would connect the family even more closely to the ruling Hohenzollerns. These marriages were not merely ceremonial. They helped cement Adelheid's legacy as a duchess, whose children carried forward her values of duty, dignity, and quiet service. At each royal wedding, Adelheid was present, not as a commanding matriarch, but as a graceful and respected figure of continuity. Although she remained largely in the background, her influence on her daughter's education, comportment, and worldview was unmistakable. Through them, she helped shape the character of courts across Northern and Central Europe. By the late 19th century, Adelheid was no longer a public figure in the political sense, but her name resonated through court registers and royal guest lists. From her quiet residence, she continued to watch the legacy of her family unfold, a legacy carried forward by daughters whose titles may have changed, but whose character bore the steady mark of their mother's hand. Following the whirlwind of dynastic marriages and political change, Adelheid gradually withdrew from the public eye and settled in the city of Dresden. It was here, in the cultural heart of Saxony, that she embraced a quieter life, one marked by reflection, artistry, and personal peace. Though no longer bound by the ceremonial expectations of a duchess consort, Adelheid continued to carry herself with the same refinement and grace that had defined her years in court. In Dresden, she surrounded herself with music, paintings, and the company of close family and friends. A gifted amateur artist, she spent long hours sketching and painting, often choosing landscapes, portraits, and scenes from memory. Music had always been part of her upbringing, and now it became a deeper source of comfort. She hosted small gatherings where chamber music was performed, preferring intimacy and sincerity over grandeur. Adelheid's residence in Dresden was modest by royal standards, but refined in every detail. It became a retreat not only for herself, but occasionally for her children and grandchildren, who visited for guidance, quiet conversations, or simply to be in the presence of someone who had lived through so much of Europe's transformation. She took no official role in politics, made no public speeches, and issued no statements. Yet her continued correspondence with noble houses and her serene presence offered something that power alone could not: stability. In a century marked by revolutions, wars, and changing empires, Adelheid of Hohenlohe-Langenburg found strength in the enduring language of art, music, and maternal wisdom, quietly shaping those around her long after her official duties had ended. By the final decades of the 19th century, Adelheid's greatest legacy no longer rested in titles or lands, but in the lives of her children and grandchildren, many of whom would shape European history. Through her daughters, especially Augusta Victoria and Caroline Mathilde, Adelheid's lineage extended into the courts of Prussia, Germany, and beyond. She became the matriarch of a generation that would witness both the height and fall of empires. Her eldest daughter, Augusta Victoria, as German empress and wife of Wilhelm II, stood at the pinnacle of imperial power before the collapse of the German monarchy during World War I. Through Augusta Victoria, Adelheid became grandmother to multiple royal children, including Crown Prince Wilhelm, whose fate would be tied to the changing tides of the 20th century. Caroline Mathilde, another of Adelheid's daughters, married Friedrich Ferdinand of Schleswig-Holstein and continued the family's influence in Northern Europe. Other daughters, such as Louise Sophie and Fedora, also married into powerful houses, further extending Adelheid's reach into the aristocratic fabric of the continent. Notably, Adelheid is recognized today as a common matrilineal ancestor of modern European monarchs, including King Carl the 16th Gustav of Sweden and King Felipe the 6th of Spain. This quiet yet enduring genealogical legacy speaks to the strength of her bloodline and the values she instilled. Through her careful parenting, private guidance, and unshaken poise, Adelheid left a mark not only on her immediate family, but on the very foundation of modern European royalty. Though Adelheid of Hohenlohe-Langenburg never sought fame, her name has echoed across time in both expected and surprising ways, appearing not only in dynastic records, but also in literature, media, and even geography. Her life, marked by quiet resilience and noble composure, has left traces that continue to surface long after her passing. One notable tribute came from the Austro-Hungarian North Pole expedition in the late 19th century. During their exploration of Franz Joseph Land, the team named a remote island Adelheid Island, a gesture that reflected her standing among European nobility. Though she never saw the Arctic, her name became a marker on the map, far from the royal salons of Dresden and Danzig. Adelheid also found a curious place in modern fiction. In the British television drama Victoria, she was portrayed in a fictionalized form under the nickname Heidi. Though the series took creative liberties, it introduced a new audience to her character, emphasizing her ties to Queen Victoria and the complex network of European aristocracy in the 19th century. While dramatized, the depiction hinted at the enduring intrigue surrounding her quiet strength and dignified presence. These references, scattered across remote islands and primetime television, reveal how deeply Adelheid's story has woven itself into the fabric of European memory. She may not have sought attention, but her legacy has quietly persisted, crossing borders and centuries. Through family, story, and geography, Adelheid remains a symbol of nobility that did not shout, but endured. In the quiet city of Dresden, Adelheid spent the final chapter of her life with dignity, reflection, and a deep connection to the arts. Far removed from the court intrigues and dynastic ambitions that had once surrounded her, she embraced a rhythm of life shaped by music, painting, and the comforting routines of daily prayer. Her residence, while not lavish, was filled with warmth, memories, and the portraits of the family she had guided into Europe's highest courts. Friends and visitors often noted the peaceful atmosphere of her Dresden home. There was no sense of grandeur, only grace. Her conversations, always thoughtful, were steeped in memory and quiet wisdom. She continued to receive correspondence from her children and grandchildren, some of whom now lived within royal palaces across the continent. To them, she was not just mother or grandmother, but the moral anchor of their lineage. Even in her final years, Adelheid remained active in cultural circles, occasionally attending local concerts and supporting charitable causes. She maintained her lifelong interest in religious devotion, and her daily habits reflected a life rooted in humility and balance. Illness came gradually, not with sudden force, and those around her were able to prepare, though saying farewell was no less painful. On the 25th of January in the year 1900, Adelheid passed away in Dresden at the age of 64. Her death was marked with quiet honors, and she was remembered not with pomp, but with genuine respect. News of her passing was noted across German-speaking Europe, not only because of her titles, but because of the dignity with which she had lived. Though her name never stood atop thrones, Adelheid's influence ran deep, through nations, generations, and the private hearts of those she loved. Her farewell was not the end of a reign, but the closing note of a life composed with care, grace, and strength. What do you think about Duchess Elisabeth of Wurttemberg? Was Elizabeth a tender-hearted duchess, graceful, devout, and deeply beloved, who brought light to a fading emperor and stood with quiet strength at the heart of a great empire? Or was she a fleeting figure, a young life cut short by duty, remembered only in letters and buried before her legacy could truly bloom? And what about Princess Adelheid of Hohenlohe-Langenburg? Was Adelheid a noble matriarch, guiding her daughters into Europe's most powerful courts, shaping empires from behind closed doors, and building a legacy through resilience and grace? Or was she merely a forgotten duchess, her name lost beneath imperial shadows, known more through lineage than through voice? Were these women silent threads in the grand fabric of monarchy, or were they the quiet foundation that held their worlds together? Did they shape history with whispered wisdom and private strength? Or were they carried along by forces far beyond their control? We would love to hear your thoughts. Let us know in the comments below. And if this story touched you, please like, share, and subscribe to our channel for more journeys into history's hidden hearts, stories of sacrifice, dignity, and the unseen women who shaped our world. Thank you so much for watching.